Now it's time for Dialogue this week. In this corner, we invite guests from in and out of Korea to talk about a wide variety of issues, ranging from culture and sports to the latest trends around the world. Now, South Korea's film market shrank for a second consecutive year in 2021 due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Revenue from box office sales and online releases and exports of Korean films hit $855 million last year, according to the Korean Film Council, and this represents a 60% decline from the pre-pandemic year of 2019. As the film industry continues to reel from the fallout of the global pandemic, local filmmakers say that they're facing an existential crisis. We discussed how the industry is faring and how filmmakers have had to adapt to the situation. And for this, I'm joined by Piers Conran, film critic and producer in Seoul and editor of the Korean Film Council's website, Kobiz. Very warm welcome to you, Piers. Thank you for joining us today. Good morning,
Sia. Thank you very much for having me.
Right, and well, over the course of the pandemic, we've seen less and less offline events going on, show openings, movie premieres, screening. Would you say that the significance of these have been, well, dying over the stretch of the pandemic?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, of course, the events, the structure of events, whether it's press screenings and VIP screenings and special event screenings for audiences, have always been a huge part of the film culture in Korea. And of course, unavoidably, accounting for COVID, it's been impossible to stage a number of those events. So we've seen the press screenings are still going on, although a lot of press don't go to those screenings anymore. I certainly don't. But VIP screenings have ended completely, unfortunately. So that was always a big event. The screenings that would happen a few days before the movie opens, and there's been just a limited amount of the so-called GV, guest visit, or Q&A events with new releases. With COVID raging, it's just not really possible to do that. There has been kind of it's changed the social environment for filmmakers as well, because of especially the lack of these VIP screenings, where normally it's a good opportunity for filmmakers to kind of get together organically and have those kind of organic connections. And unfortunately, without that, that means a lot of people aren't meeting each other the same way that they normally are.
And it seems that revenue's just been declining drastically over the last 2 years. And while some 500 film industry workers, they jointly released an official statement on Wednesday saying that, it's been such a tough time, and they've called on the government to set up fundamental measures to help them revive the industry. Just how hard have they been hit by the pandemic, and how are they, in a way, forced to adapt to the situation?
Well, it certainly has been an existential crisis for a lot of people, and it's very unfortunate and strange, where you have kind of two sides to it, where the pandemic is making things extremely difficult for a lot of people in the industry, while at the same time the massive success of Korean content globally, particularly Korean dramas, has been bringing in a massive influx of foreign capital, and some people are of course doing very well. And so the answer for a lot of people is to be able to pivot to dramas. So that's not possible for everyone, but we're seeing more and more filmmakers are moving over to do small screen content. The below the line technicians, such as cinematographers, production designers, all that kind of these key crew members who are normally quite segregated between film and drama, they're also working on dramas now, particularly on streaming dramas for the likes of Netflix, Apple TV, Disney Plus. And so we're seeing this massive exodus. And of course, a lot of the major Korean film companies, the production companies, the studios, the distributors, they're very worried about financing new Korean films. So they've kind of stopped financing films, and they're financing dramas. Companies that worked exclusively on films are now looking at dramas, and so we're seeing just a huge amount of that at the moment.
And well, in response to their financial concerns, the government's promised to spend over $6.7 million to support new films in Korea. Well, not sure how significant this level of support is, but how do you think Korean filmmakers will have to continue to really adapt and respond to the needs of a more global, constantly streaming market?
Well, it's a good question, because now a big change, I think, now for filmmakers, for studios in Korea is they used to have to consider what is going to work in the Korean market. For films, it was really it's a very strong theatrical market in Korea. It's really do or die. A film will live or die based on its box office receipts in Korea alone, and companies don't really expect to make money overseas on their films. With dramas, it's completely different. Dramas at this point are expected to generate massive interest overseas, and so when you're pitching content to studios, you have to consider the global audience and think of how these themes and stories will transpose to a global audience. So you kind of have this kind of bifurcated kind of drama industry at this point, where you still have the very classic K-dramas, the romantic K-dramas that have the very local themes, that have a very loyal global audience that really appreciate that very, very Korean content. But you then also have these kind of larger, more fantastical dramas that we're seeing, particularly on Netflix, that are kind of, things that have very easily digestible social allegories within like high concept genre concepts. So of course I'm talking about things like Squid Game, All of Us Are Dead, Hellbound, all of that. And these are things that are really doing well internationally. And so particularly for filmmakers, people who didn't start as drama makers, they're more angling towards that larger side, that looking for that kind of global audience with these kind of large genre projects that have these kind of social allegories. So they're kind of having to find a way of how to change their filmmaking style that was mostly looking to get a local audience, and now thinking to do that in a larger, longer format for with more general themes that'll really work for a global audience.
And well, in order to bring new ideas and freshness to the screens, it seems essential to nurture young talent. And well, how does South Korea currently support young film directors? And would you say there's something of an ecosystem now?
Oh, absolutely. I think Korea has been very good about supporting younger filmmakers. There's a few different avenues that happens. The biggest thing is the film schools. Korea has a wonderful network of very great film schools, such as the Korean Academy of Film Arts, or the Korean National University of Arts. And over the years, these universities have started to offer these graduate programs where students can come in and make a feature film, and that'll essentially be their debut. And it's kind of like well-funded indie film. And a lot of these filmmakers, are noticed for these films, and they go on to become massive directors. People like Jo Sung-hee, who made Space Sweepers, he debuted with a film called End of Animal, which was one of these film school projects. So you have a lot of that, and I think that the industry as well has always looked to kind of renew itself constantly, and so they do really look to younger filmmakers, and we're still seeing a lot of that, even people that didn't come in through these film schools. So you'll see two of the most significant films that came out during the pandemic there was the film The Call, which was made by the debut of a 30-year-old filmmaker called Lee Chung-yeon. And then you have a few months ago, there was the really good romantic comedy called Nothing Serious, which was the commercial debut of an indie filmmaker called Jung Ga-young, who was also 30 when she made that. So it's great that they're still trusting young filmmakers to kind of attract these younger audiences into theaters.
And while we want to hear more about female directors in South Korea too, this is something you've brought attention to with your writing. And well, do you think they're becoming more proportionately represented in the industry?
That's a very good question, and something I kind of I wonder about a lot. The answer in short is yes, of course they are, and there's still a long way to go. But I think there's been, during the pandemic, well, right up until the beginning of the pandemic, things were really getting quite a bit better. And in 2019, out of about 50 commercial films, five of them were made by women, and four of those were like in the top 11 films of the year. So it was really very successful. And then during the pandemic, we've seen a number of films by women directors come out. However, I'm of the impression that a lot of those were kind of, smaller films that were kind of used as sort of like sacrificial goats a little bit to kind of test the markets in these, between these different COVID peaks. And so now we're left with a situation where there are a huge amount of films that are finished or in post-production that are awaiting release, and things that have been successively delayed during the pandemic. And out of those, very few of them are by women. So we've only got there are 7 films that are in post-production or awaiting release by women out of, something like 80 or 100 films out there. Out of the 34 films currently in production, only one of them is directed by a woman. So I think there's still quite a long way to go. But things are a lot better than they were a few years ago, for sure.
And well, 2022, how do you forecast this year for South Korean films?
That's a really great question, and I hope things will be better. I think they will be. I think after we kind of get through this Omicron wave, particularly, and when regulations start to change a bit, and when we see people kind of interacting again, and then distributors will hopefully, have the confidence to release some of those really big, heavy hitters that they've been sitting on for a long time, which they're just terrified of releasing into empty theaters. So there's a lot of really great content waiting in the wings. And once Omicron subsides and gives studios an opportunity to release some of that content, I think we'll see a massive swing. It'll take a while to get back to where we were, and who knows if we'll reach 100% of where we were pre-pandemic. But I think there'll be a big change later this year. So I'm expecting maybe by summer we'll see some pretty big hits again.
And also, what are you working on for the rest of the year? We want to hear more about your plans and any projects you might have on.
Oh, well, I'm just doing what I'm usually doing, watching K-dramas, writing about films and the industry, and hopefully doing a bit of more travel this year. There are a few festivals I've been invited to, and after a few years of not being able to travel, it'll be great to be able to kind of rekindle those connections on the international circuit.
Definitely a lot of film festivals coming up. And, well, would you be able to recommend some that are taking place in Korea?
Oh, sure. Well, of course, the three main festivals in Korea are the Jeonju Film Festival, which takes place in spring, and then you have for genre film fans, you have the Bucheon Fantastic Film Festival in summer, and then you have the big one, the so-called Cannes of Asia, the Busan Film Festival, down in October. And so we're hoping that those events will be much more significant this year. Jeonju, which is the first one on deck, is hoping to have a fully physical event this year, which it wasn't able to do the last 2 years. So I'll be very excited to go back myself. I haven't been there since 2019. And then especially Bucheon as well. I think by summer, hopefully things will be much more open by then. And I really hope that international guests will be able to return and kind of to really have one of those old school film festivals that we love to go to.
Definitely, fingers crossed there. And well, this is where we'll have to wrap up our discussion. Thank you, Piers, so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.